Hello and welcome to Atlantic Debrief, the Atlantic Council Europe Center's podcast on the most pressing issues impacting the transatlantic relationship today. My name is James Batchik. I'm an associate director here at the Europe Center. And my guest today, we're delighted to have Vytis Jurkonis, the project director at Freedom House's Vilnius Office. Thank you, Vytis, for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So we're in DC, but we're actually really delighted to be having this discussion in person, coming to you from the lovely Lithuanian embassy here, and where we just wrapped up some really fascinating discussions as part of the Council's Central Europe Week series of events, discussions, and roundtables taking place not only in DC, but also in region, in Vilnius, and Prague, and Warsaw, really to raise a level of ambition around the dynamism of the U.S. Central European relationship, to really drive forward the cooperation to take on the challenge that face both the United States and our partners in the region as well. So for today's debrief, we want to talk about all things Belarus. And really thrilled to have one of Europe's most foremost experts on Belarus in the country here with us to talk about perspectives on Belarus and the regime's maintenance of power, how this impacts Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and then widen the scope a bit and beyond. So would love to start in Belarus specifically and talking about the Lukashenka regime itself. Over the past couple of years, we've really seen its willingness to crack down with excessive violence to stifle any sort of domestic dissent, especially following those illegitimate elections back in August of 2020. So I'd really love to hear your analysis of the state of play on the ground. How has the Lukashenka regime been maintaining its hold of power, and what is the democratic opposition to do about it?
Yes, Belarus regime is spreading the terror there is ongoing. And we have recently observed the uptick of the repressions because they are preparing for so-called the sham re-election. And we see that they are trying to wipe out whoever is active still, despite the repressions which are lasting for years already, which on the one side shows that there are still active people on the ground who are willing to protest, who are willing to do some underground work, document human rights abuses, do the independent reporting. At the same time, it shows that they are not that confident. They are not that, the regime which looks on the surface that it's stable. They are not doing great in terms of they lack human resources, first of all, because a lot of people, bright people, are leaving the country. The IT companies, which were at the forefront of the Belarusian kind of propaganda, EPAM, Wargaming, PandaDoc, all of them are leaving, which is a hit to the economy, to the sustainability of the economy. On the other hand, we have the Belarus, which is becoming a military garage for the Russian war machine. They are using it, they're exploiting, they are receiving a lot of money. So though technically they do have money, the question is how sustainable that is, and the dependence on the Kremlin is only growing. So Lukashenko would like to come back to this the alleged balancing game, and they like to start selling their hostages, the political prisoners. I would call them political hostages. So I hope that European countries have learned from their mistakes before, because that we have seen that movie before. Meanwhile, with the democratic forces, I think that they did an incredible job since 2020, making sure that Belarus remains high on the agenda. It's not the issue, the priority number one, but knowing that we did have Afghanistan, we did have Nagorno-Karabakh full-scale invasion in Ukraine, and all other stuff, I think that the fact that we do have US-Belarus strategic dialogue, that we have some democratic representations at Council of Europe, and other places, that shows an incredible work. Civil society is operating in the hybrid mode, some in outside in exile, others inside underground, which is showing spectacular resilience. Media outlets like Tutbay, now Zerkala, have managed, despite the terror, all the restrictions, to regain their audience inside Belarus, which is incredible. And I think that is promising that work is still possible, and the Belarusian society is signaling to us, don't forget us, remain committed, and we should be.
Definitely. So I'd love to switch tacks a bit and talk about Ukraine, as you mentioned, as supporting the Belarusian economy somewhat. So since Russia started and launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, we've seen really active willingness of the Belarusian, the Lukashenka regime to support Russia's war efforts. So, for example, we've seen Moscow staging and deploying its troops from Belarus to attack Ukraine, purportedly the stationing of Russian nuclear weapons in Belarus and Minsk helping evade Russian sanctions, even there aiding and abetting the really horrible practice of deporting Russian kids to Russia. So at the same time, we're also seeing the incoming administration and President-elect Donald Trump himself pretty emphatically talk about the need for a ceasefire and to stop the fighting in Ukraine. So the question then becomes, what role does Belarus play here in any sort of negotiations or ceasefire? Are they going to get a seat at the table, or what happens about Belarus when it comes to talking about settling in the near or long term Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine?
Well, again, I hope that we learn from the mistakes of the past, because we did have some platforms, Minsk dialogue, when Lukashenko was pouring coffee to Angela Merkel and others, and we know that it was not just coffee, it was not only a neutral place to meet, because Belarusian regime is an ally number one for Russia, and I think that the fact that the negotiations were happening in Belarus was very useful for Russia, because they felt they're at home. They knew what is happening in every single room. So let's not be mistaken. You mentioned the many aspects of Belarusian regime's complicity at the full-scale invasion against Ukraine. I mean, the kidnapped Ukrainian kids who are deported and had some activity in Belarus. Freedom House just recently submitted the request at the ICC, pinpointing to the this cooperation and complicity of the Belarusian regime. At the same time, it's a useful hub for Russia, where all sorts of goods, chips, drones are traveling via Belarus to Russia, and China is using it. And therefore, for instance, my country, Lithuania, is advocating for synchronization of sanctions. So I would not be naive and take Lukashenko as some sort of a negotiator. He is always, and he was always playing on the Russian side, and he was and remains and will continue to be the ally number one for Kremlin, as also the voting at the UN and other international platforms indicate.
So you mentioned China. I'd love to pick up on China and widen the scope of that here. So it's not just about Russia, but we've also seen the Lukashenko regime really increasing its diplomatic, its political, its economic relations with the likes of China, as well as North Korea and others. So I'd love to get your take on what that means. Lukashenko's regime is one of those autocracies that does border multiple NATO and EU members, so this does matter to the United States and to the alliance. So where and to what extent does this Belarus and the Lukashenko regime fit into this alignment of global autocrats, we can call it, and what threat does that pose to Europe and the United States?
Well, we do see the collaboration. I do think also that Belarus has been very useful as a laboratory of some sort of authoritarianism that Lukashenko is building for 20 years or more. We see some of the practices being implemented against the Russian civil society and independent media by Putin. At the same time, now I think that basically Lukashenko is simply fulfilling, providing services for and it's in the alliance of the authoritarian regimes. So we can see this as a global fight between authoritarian countries and democracies. I mean, China is very cautious in this. They would like to see Belarusian regime and Russia as the bad guys, not adhering to any international norms. At the same time, I think that international community needs to understand that Belarus is somewhat a low-hanging fruit in this like game, where if we can be much more tough on Belarusian regime, that doesn't require from us big costs, but then it would be a very clear signal to Moscow and to Beijing as well that we are rebooting our foreign policy and the instruments against the authoritarian countries. So in the way, Belarus is going to be a litmus paper, and I think that we need to be much more determined than before.
So low-hanging fruit for policymakers, which leads me right to my last question, where we're talking about what to do about it all. So especially when we talk about what Europe is to do about it, we're seeing a lot of dialogue and a lot of discussion around the philosophy and center of gravity in Europe shifting to the east, where ascendant ideas and philosophies from our Central European allies about especially Moscow and about especially Minsk as well have really come to the fore. And we're also seeing some of the highest levels of EU policymaking being staffed by Central European voices, including Kaja Kallas, Andrius Kubilius, and Poland, for example, holding the presidency of the Council of the European Union in January 2025. So when we have these voices and Central European voices in these policymaking roles, what should they be looking at? And what is your take on the idea that center of gravity is shifting to the east? And what does that mean for policy toward Belarus?
So we are speaking on the International Human Rights Day. I think that I would like to remember the Mr. Sakharov, who was saying that if we ignore human rights at home, it has an overspilling effect. And in a way, there's also very oftenly we heard, especially talking about Belarus, that if we do push Belarus too much on human rights and democracy, that we would push Belarus and Belarusian regime towards Russia more, as if and that's a false dilemma. It's in fact I think if we don't push for human rights and democracy, then this collaboration is going only to intensify. So from that perspective, I think that all the international instruments, the very same ICC submission, OSCE, Council of Europe, Moscow mechanism, universal jurisdiction, as Lithuania has started this process. We need to use the toolbox which is available. Sometimes I see that Western diplomats do forget that the instruments actually are there, and we need to reboot these and actually fight for that space of international order and be in cooperation with the civil society, human rights defenders, because this argument that we very oftenly also hear that human rights is somewhat interfering to domestic affairs. It's not. It's enshrined in the all the charters, in the international norms and the regulations. So let's not shy away. Let's be much more determined, and let's put human rights at the forefront of our foreign affairs. And that it might also solve some of our national security issues, because if we don't push for human rights and democracy, then we are leaving the vacuum for the authoritarians to apply their tools, and that would be kleptocratic ties, that would be the brutal force, the terror on their own respective societies. So I think that we need to have much more confidence in what we are. We are stronger, not only economy wise, but the unity wise, because alliance wise, if we take only the Baltic Sea region alone, their budget is higher than Russia. Can you imagine that? And we are not talking about the entire Euro-Atlantic community. So I think that we need to have much more confidence and actually apply the tools which are available to us.
So Vytis, thank you so much for joining us for this very special Atlantic debrief, and thank you to the Lithuanian Embassy for letting us crash and do a recording here. That's all the time we have, but do make sure to take a look out and keep an eye out for all the great content and programming and events that we have as part of our Central Europe Week, happening not just in DC, but our team abroad in all over the region, and stay tuned for more debriefs to come. Thanks.